Welcome back to the Power Breakfast Show, and this morning on our Power Breakfast interview, we want to have a discussion on the plight of refugees in Dadaab. There's been a lot of conversation going on in the past 1 week on the refugee status at the Dadaab camp, and especially in light of the Al-Shabaab terror attacks as well as the terror threats that we have received as a country. And to help us understand more on what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, this morning we're hosting the UNHCR country representative, Mr. Rauf Mazu. And remember, any questions you have, 22422 is the SMS line. Mutekinja, of course, is there, and he'll be moderating this discussion as well as reading any comments, suggestions, or any questions that you have. Mutegi?
Good morning, Mr.
Good morning.
Mazu.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Perhaps you should start by introducing yourself and saying who you are and how you ended up here as a representative of the UNHCR.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rauf Mazu. I'm the UNHCR country representative in Kenya. I've been here since September 2013. And before that, I was at our headquarters covering this region, the Horn and East of Africa region.
So what's the issue here? Why are we getting noise about Dadaab?
I think Dadaab is, as you know, one of the biggest camps in the world. Refugees have been there for... Some refugees have been there for over 20 years. So it's obviously a place that a lot of people talk about. It also represents international solidarity to responding to the plight of refugees. There are not many countries in the world which have been in a position of providing asylum to that many refugees for such a long time.
The figure they give is about 500,000 people.
With the evolution of things and with the return of some refugees, because since 2011 a number of refugees have been returning, this number has reduced, and the current number in Dadaab is about 350,000.
Mainly Somalis, no other nationality.
No, there are about 13 nationalities in Dadaab, but they are mainly Somalis. I would say 90% of the refugees in Dadaab are Somalis, but you also have Ethiopian, you have refugees from the Great Lakes region, so you do have quite a lot of other refugees, but the vast majority of them are Somali indeed.
Are there refugees in Kenya, maybe for the public knowledge, who are not in Dadaab and who are not in camps? There
are refugees in various parts of the country. There are refugees living in as I said, various parts of the country. The main location where there are refugees are Kakuma in the Turkana County. There are about 180,000 refugees, the majority of them being South Sudanese. Many of them have started arriving since late 2013 for about a year. And you do also have some refugees living here in Nairobi, about 50 to 55,000. That's the estimate.
55,000?
About 55,000 registered refugees here in Nairobi, yes.
So our politicians, or some people in government, want that refugee camp at Dadaab removed to a place called Duble. Do they have a legitimate concern?
The legitimate concern, as I said, Kenya has been hosting a large number of refugees, and whether it is for the refugees themselves or for those who are receiving them and providing them with protection and assistance, what we're all hoping is a durable solution, and the best durable solution for refugees is to be able to go back to their places of origin. So we're all hoping that refugees, whether Somalis or from other countries, will one day be able to go back to their places of origin. For them to go back to their places of origin, there has to be peace, and they have to be provided with support and assistance to reconstruct their lives. If you take the South Sudanese refugees, for instance, who've been in this country for a long period of time, and now, unfortunately, as a result of the most recent conflict, we had close to 50,000 South Sudanese refugees who have arrived here in Kenya in the year 2014 only. One day they will be able to go back to their places of origin, but as we all know, the conflict in South Sudan is still on, and therefore they cannot return. For Somali refugees, as I said earlier, since 2011, when we had the last large influx of Somali refugees as a result of the drought and famine that was there at the time, we have seen a reduction in a number of Somali refugees, and in 2014 only we had a reduction of about 50,000 Somalis who went back to their places of origin spontaneously. And since late last year, beginning of this year, we've also started a pilot project to support some of these spontaneous returnees. And in about 2 months, we had a bit more than 2,000 people who were assisted to return to their places of origin.
The concern about the government is expressing is that Dadaab refugee camp has become the training ground for Al-Shabaab. And they feel that if they close the camp and they moved it to Doble, I think, which is inside Somalia, the Al-Shabaab problem, the menace may be minimized.
Well, the first thing is that I think we have to recognize the effort that the government has made in providing security to the camp in Dadaab. There are about 700 security forces in and around Dadaab who are ensuring security in and around Dadaab. So at least we have to recognize the efforts that they are making. They are present on the ground and they are doing everything that they can to maintain security in Dadaab. That being said, Dadaab as a camp, as I said, is 350,000 people. It's the size of a middle-sized town, I would think, in Kenya. So it requires a lot of security and it requires a lot of effort. It is also located not far away from Somalia. And as I said earlier, in some parts of Somalia, there is still an ongoing conflict. So it's a place which requires a lot of efforts in security. We have provided quite a bit of support to the government, and we spend a bit more than $3.6 million every year to support the government. Every year to support the efforts of the government to maintain security in and around Dadaab. We'll continue to provide this kind of support, and we also have to appeal to other donors to enhance. The more security, the more knowledge we have about what is happening in Dadaab, the better. But we must recognize all the efforts that are being made right now by men and women in uniform in Dadaab.
What would they take to move those refugees from Dadaab to Dublin?
Well, the first thing is these refugees came to Dadaab because they fled violence, they fled fears, they were fearing what was happening in their country, and they came here for protection, and that protection
and that protection not be provided at Dublin.
The reason why they came is because they thought that this protection could not be provided in Somalia. And we all know that KDF is present in Somalia also for a reason. KDF is present in Somalia because, unfortunately, we have a conflict that is ongoing in this country. So moving refugees into Somalia and place them into Doble would may put them at risk. So refugees, and we've been hearing...
Doble is Somali territory, the Somali country.
Yes.
But it's near the border of Kenya.
It is on the other side of the border, yes.
The country, the same security be provided there. The same government security, Kenyan government security, can't it move with them there?
I think
because it's Somalia.
There are two things. As you're saying, first it is Somalia, so each country has a responsibility to provide security on its own territory. The Somali situation is such that Somalia has gotten the support of AMISOM, a number of military forces, which include Kenya. And I believe that the Kenyan forces that are present in Somalia are helping to bring back stability in this country. Should they be asked to provide security to a population just on the other side of the border, a Somali population, that is something that I cannot respond to. But I would say that it should in principle be primarily the responsibility of the government of Somalia to provide assistance to its population. Now, what needs to be said also is, and we've seen that in other situations in the world, we've seen that in the case of Boko Haram, for instance, in Nigeria, a response to security has to be regional, and it has to be coordinated at a regional level. You had Boko Haram operating in Nigeria, then they went to Cameroon, then they went to Chad, when they went to Niger. So they don't know borders. So the response has to be a regional one, involving all the countries who are receiving Somali refugees, and of course Somalia. The other thing is that, as I said before, we all hope that, and we all expect that Somali refugees will be able to go back to their place of origin. They all hope to be able to go back to their places of origin. That's the dream of each refugee, to be able to go back to his or her place of origin. For that to happen, security is required in various places, and security exists in some parts of Somalia. But beyond security, you need to make sure that the international community mobilizes resources to help the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the country. And that's something which is very much needed, and much more efforts than what has been done so far need to be put in place for Somali refugees to be able to go back to their country and reconstruct their country. It's not just a matter of crossing the border and becoming an internally displaced person. It's a matter of going back to your place of origin and being able to reconstruct.
Why can't you then go to Double and become internally displaced? Instead of being refugees in Kenya?
Yes, two things. First, we signed a tripartite agreement in November 2013, Somalia, Kenya, and the UNHCR. And one of the clauses of this tripartite agreement was to say that the repatriation has to be voluntary, and that refugees should be able to go back, ideally, to their places of origin. The objective is not to push people back to their places, which would constitute a refoulement if the government was to do that. But it's more a matter of making sure that they can go back to their place of origin and stay there. If they were to find themselves as IDPs, if security was not provided to them, what would happen is that they would come right back to Kenya, where they would feel that security could be provided to them.
The government kind of seems to have given a deadline.
Yes.
I don't know whether your office has any communication with the government to talk about this problem.
We have constant communication with the government. The government department which deal with refugees, the Department of Refugee Affairs, which is headed by Commissioner Komen. And we have constant discussion with them. The camps are managed by the Department of Refugee Affairs, and the camps are the responsibility of Kenya, because the camps are on Kenyan soil, and as a sovereign state, Kenya has accepted to provide security and assistance to these refugees in the camp. It is not for us to move refugees back to their places if it's not in a voluntary manner. It is, as I said before, should be the decision of each and every refugee to return, and the responsibility of the obligation of the country that is providing asylum.
The politicians are saying they have given UNHCR a deadline. You move them. What is your reaction? You have been given a deadline. These fellows need to go to Dublin.
We have been discussing with the government. We'll continue to discuss with the government, and we will reiterate the fact that repatriation needs to be voluntary. We believe that with the improvement of the situation in Somalia, refugees will continue to return. As I said, the number of Somali refugees have been going down. Two things that needs to be done is to make sure that there is security in the places of origin of these refugees, and secondly, that they can have access to basic services in their places of origin. And we've also appealed to the international community to do much more than what they've been doing so far in terms of assistance to refugees when they go back to their places of origin, to reconstruct and rebuild their lives.
Is it a fact that Al-Shabaab have a base at refugee camps?
As I mentioned earlier, there are about 700 security forces, members of the security force in Dadaab, providing security in and around Dadaab. And I would very much doubt that with such a presence from the Kenyan security, Al-Shabaab would be in a position of establishing a base in Dadaab.
Why is it that the government, although this question may not be, but if there are 55,000 refugees living in Kenya, in Nairobi, why is the government concerned about Dadaab and not the ones living in Nairobi?
I think the concern on Dadaab is linked to the fact that, as I said, it's a fairly large refugee location. As you said before, it's often described as one of the largest refugee camps in the world, and it is located fairly close to the Somali border. So that, I would say, is probably the reason why you have this specific concern.
Well, you said some of those refugees have been there for 20 years.
Yes.
Which means people who were born 20 years ago, they're grown-up people. They don't even know their country.
You actually have people who were born in Dadaab and who have even given birth to children who are now born in Dadaab, yes.
So why would anybody want to take those people? Essentially, they're Kenyans. They don't know Somalia. You have being a refugee in a country, and what characterizes being a refugee in a country is the fact that you've been forced to flee your place of origin, and you want to be able to return. It is your right to return to your place of origin. So even if they were born here, even if their children were born here, they are still Somali citizens, and they aspire to being able to go back to their place of origin one day, when the situation will allow in their place of origin. In actual fact, what it looks like why Kenyans are unhappy is that 20 years is a long time. The deputy president was saying east or west, and then it's south or north. Home is best.
And it's very true. I hope you will have an opportunity one day to go to Dadaab, and you will see that this is not a place where people would want to stay for such a long time. They would want to return to their places of origin, and we've seen in other parts of the world, as soon as the situation allows, refugees are the fastest to return to their place of origin. You can look at the situation in Rwanda, for instance. As soon as the situation allowed, many Rwandese refugees who were around the region went back to their place of origin. Some who had very high position in exile, but they were in exile. And I would fully agree with the Deputy President in saying that there is no better place than home. We all have, and the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that the KDF has gone to Somalia to help stabilize the country. And I'm convinced that the 50,000 that I've mentioned before who returned in 2014 returned as a result of the efforts that AMISOM, generally speaking, but more specifically Kenya, have made in trying to stabilize Kenya. You don't want to force people to return to a place for them to, a few days after, come back in exile. You want the return to be sustainable. You want the return to take place in conditions of safety and dignity, and you want those returning to be able to restart their lives and rebuild normal lives, not return and find themselves in an internally displaced camp.
You say you're in charge of the region.
I'm in charge of Kenya. Before coming here, when I was based in Geneva, I was covering this region.
Were there Kenyan refugees anywhere?
There are Kenyan refugees in Uganda.
What reason would they be having to be there?
I think they fled a few years ago
because of post-election violence.
Linked to the post-electoral violence, we are working very hard, and there was a memorandum of understanding which was signed a few weeks ago here in Kenya for them to be assisted to return. It's about 1,500 people. It's not a large number, but there is a fact that you do have people who felt that they had to leave Kenya and seek asylum at that time, and now they are going to return back to their country. But it's today that they feel that they can return. It took time, but it's today, and nobody in Uganda forced them to return. The government of Uganda said you can remain here as long as you feel that you should. Now that they feel that they can return, they are going to return, and this process is going to take place very, very soon.
Is the refugee camps in Kenya, Dadaab and Kakuma, are they a drain to our economy, and to what extent?
I wouldn't say that they are a drain to the economy. They are, most of the assistance that is being provided in these two camps is coming from the international community, whether it is food assistance, healthcare, and the rest. What I would say is, and I think we shouldn't see that as a drain to the economy. It's a fact that it's as a result of the huge generosity of populations in Garissa and in Turkana that these refugees can be here. It is never an ideal situation to have a large foreign population on your territory. So it may not be a drain to the economy as such, but it has impacts. It has environmental impacts, and it does have impact in the sense that providing food assistance, free food assistance to refugees in Garissa, to refugees in Kakuma, has an impact on the economy in the sense that this food assistance that come, which is free food assistance, does impact. I mean, for local farmers, having this large quantity of free food assistance being provided does impact. So there are impacts on the economy, but more importantly, I think we have to focus on the fact that it is the goodwill of the people that is there, and that we have to try to respond to.
Are there Kenyans in Kakuma or Dadaab who claim to be refugees, but yet they are Kenyans, who have registered there as refugees regularly?
It was said on a number of occasions, it has been said that the case of Dadaab, at the time of drought in that region, some people needing to be provided with some support and assistance may have registered as refugees. So this is something that we were informed of a few years ago, but that's a fact. So there are people who felt at some point that having the refugee status is something that could help them in life. Most of them now want to reclaim and regain their Kenyan citizenship. They've never lost their Kenyan citizenship, but they want to reaffirm their Kenyan citizenship and no longer be considered as refugees. And there is a process. There is a group that has been put in place by the Ministry of Interior to look into that specific issue. They've traveled around the country. They met with some of these individuals, and I'm sure that a solution will be found soon.
There have been allegations of corruption in the processing of papers within UNHCR. I don't know whether you heard about that. In some instances, even abuse, even sexual harassment incidents.
I'm not aware of sexual harassment incident. What I'm aware of, and is something which we have to constantly remind people of, is the fact that the services provided by UNHCR are free, and that nobody should go around selling the possibility of being resettled to the Western world, or selling refugee cards, or selling any identification document. It's free. It's a right of an individual who seek asylum here to be registered freely, either with us or with the government at Traoré Moyo. We then put our database together, but it is free. Nobody should pay for any service in relation to seeking asylum or being provided support as a refugee.
What about when you're providing food? That free food that you provide, is it straight? Or is it prone to corruption?
It is. We have a system in place now which is fairly strong. It's a system that is based on biometrics and on fingerprints. Any individual who come and receive food assistance has to use his or her fingerprint before you receive food assistance. So since we've introduced that system with our colleague from the World Food Programme in late 2013, we've seen a great improvement in the quality of services being provided, and we can say for sure that anybody who comes and receives assistance is indeed the person who is entitled to that assistance.
Judging from what you have told me, it's like it's not possible, what the government is saying, it is not possible for these refugees to be moved from Dadaab unless they go voluntarily. There is no other way of moving them unless they go voluntarily. So whatever is being said here is of no consequence. Is that my understanding?
I wouldn't say that is of no consequence, because the asylum has been given by Kenya. It's a sovereign act that Kenya has made in providing asylum to people who are fleeing violence from their country. If as a country, as a sovereign country, Kenya decides that the people to whom asylum has been given should go, it's an act or something that as a sovereign state, Kenya may do. What I would add...
That would be a breach of that agreement, the tripartite agreement.
It would be, if refugees were be forced to return, it would be in breach of international law. And again, these conventions are conventions which have been signed by states, not by UNHCR, but by states. And it would also be in contradiction with the tripartite agreement which has been signed between Kenya, ourselves and Somalia. So any government can do anything it wants to do because government is sovereign in its decisions. But this act would, forcing refugees to go back to their place of origin, would be in contradiction of international law.
Is there any way that those refugees can be absorbed in this country? Many as they are. Is there a possibility? Suppose there is no peace in Somalia.
Yes.
They are going to have elections, I think, 2017.
2016, yeah.
2016? And there is chaos and mayhem. Is it feasible that the 350,000 refugees can be absorbed in this country and move away from the camp?
Yeah, I don't think we should hope, wish, or even think that there will never be peace in Somalia, because the fact that there is no peace in Somalia has resulted in Kenya having to send its defense force to that country. Peace will return to Somalia. A number of countries in Africa have been at war for a long period of time, but peace has returned at some point. All efforts that are being made will yield fruits and results, and Somalis, from wherever they are in the world, will be able to go back to their place of origin. The conflict has lasted, as I say, for more than 24 years, but it will come to an end. I happen to have worked in West Africa in the past. People thought that the Liberian conflict would never end. It ended. People thought that the Somalia conflict, the Sierra Leone conflict would never end. It ended. The Côte d'Ivoire conflict ended. The Mali conflict ended. Even the Central African Republic conflict will end. All conflicts end, and they end as a result of all the efforts that are being made. Kenya has been a key country in bringing peace to the region, whether it is in South Sudan. Kenya was key in the peace agreement that was signed in South Sudan, and I'm sure Kenya will also be a key force in bringing peace to Somalia. That's what we should all pray for and aim for, and that will come, and refugees will be able to return. Will some of them want to come back to Kenya and settle there because they know the place, and because we'll see. But the most important thing is for them to be able to reclaim their citizenship. It's important when you found yourself as a refugee for a long period of time that you are allowed to reaffirm your citizenship as a citizen of the place where you've had to flee because of conflict.
The reason I'm asking about this integration is, think about that person who was born 20 years ago.
Yes.
Or more than 20 years ago. You say they have children and grandchildren.
Yeah.
They were born there,
yeah,
and they have children and grandchildren there. What kind of people are those now? They're in camps. They don't. What economic input they have? What do they do? How do you live there in a camp as a grandfather, a father, and you are living there for 20 years? You live in that camp. Isn't it time to think about maybe doing something to make them active? And economical contributor. Well, instead of receiving free food, for 20 years we have received free food. When will they earn a living?
It's a policy choice that is made by countries. If you take Uganda, for instance, in Uganda they don't have camps, they have settlements, and refugees who are there are allowed to have a piece of land and to work until they go back to their place of origin. They have refugees from many countries, as I mentioned, Kenya, but they also have refugees from DRC and from other places. So the policy decision at some point made by Uganda was to say, we are better off having refugees work, being out of camp, contribute to the economy, than to have them in camps.
I am assuming even the Kenyans who are in the refugees
they are in a
settlement.
Yes, they are in a settlement, and they have access to land,
input.
and they have been able to be part of the economy. So that's a policy choice that was made by Uganda at the time. The policy choice that was made by Kenya was a different one, was to say that refugees should remain in camps. So that's, again, as I said, a policy choice that has been made. Some people say that it would be better for refugees to be part of the economy of the country where they are. It is something that I personally believe, but it is something that the government has to reflect on and introducing its policy if it is believed that it is in the interest of the country. But if one looks at Kenya being one of the top 10 economies in Africa, and with growth percentage, economic growth percentage that are fairly high, there are cases where having refugees being part of the economy would actually benefit. Most of the refugees who live in Nairobi are not receiving assistance. They are part of the economy. They produce wealth. And they contribute to the growth of the Kenyan economy. But those in camps are receiving assistance. That being said, if you look at this economy, if you look at the economy in Turkana, the camp economy as we call it in Turkana or in Garissa, they do receive quite a lot of resources, remittances from families that they have abroad. So that also contributes, and that is also injected in the Kenyan economy. So in the long run, and looking at the various policy decisions of governments around Africa, I believe that there will be a recognition of the fact that it is better for the economy of the country to make sure that the refugees who are there contribute under certain conditions, of course, but that the refugees contribute, that the support from the international community that is given for the humanitarian assistance be provided in a different way, supporting infrastructure.
That to me looks very logical and reasonable and economic sense. It makes sense.
Yes.
Why is it that Kenya for 20 years had not seen that, or had not been convinced by the international community to convert those camps into settlements?
There are a few things. First, when you have a massive refugee influx, for the first few years, a number of them need humanitarian assistance to survive, and it is also it makes more economic sense to have a situation where they are together initially, but with time that changes. The issue is that you never know at the beginning of a refugee crisis how long it will last. So at the beginning you believe that, and when Somalis crossed the border, when South Sudanese crossed the border, I'm sure they thought that in a year or two they would be able to go back to their places of origin. But unfortunately,
in this case, it has taken more than 20 years.
You put in place a system that is meant to last for a short period of time, and then it lasts. So at some point you have to shift, and you cannot. There are cases where it is difficult to shift, but in the long run, it's clear that discussing with organizations such as the World Bank and others who look at economic trends on a long period of time, and looking at what is happening in refugee camp, the length of time that they are in the camp, it is increasingly evident that having a population sitting in camp for a long period of time receiving free assistance is not good for them, because it's difficult for them to reintegrate when they return to their country and live normally. But for the country itself, it creates a kind of oasis of wealth, if I can use this term, which is sometimes resented by the population which have received them. Why are these people sitting there and not working where we have to work? So we more and more, the thought is to say, because unfortunately this conflict lasts longer than before, the average time of a refugee now, of a refugee situation is 17 years around the world. So it's clear that we need to start looking at how we provide assistance in a different way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mazu.
Thank you very much.
We run out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll turn you back to Kirigo and the studio, where we'll be hearing that Mugithi from central Kenya.